Hello and welcome to the Terrace. Oh no, not the Terrace Scholarship. Well, damn it! I've got do that all the time. Hello and welcome to the latest from Heart Standard. Jesus, my name is Joel Sked, and I'm not yet joined by Craig Cairns. Craig's having some technical issues at the moment, so rather than keep you waiting, I thought I would jump on and there's some questions and just talk about a couple of things before we get into the main crux of the video, and that's to do with Craig's article on Derek McInnes' kind of like tactical evolution through his time at the time in Scottish football, starting at St Johnstone, into Aberdeen, then Kilmarnock. But first, as always, Heart Standard is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Yeah, so apologies at the start here. I'm going to be all over the place because, like the last time, I was not prepared for this. However, we will, Hearts at 4 o'clock announced the signing of Alexandros, and let me get this pronunciation right. Apparently, it's Alexandros Kyziridis. So Alexandros Kyziridis, even though there's a Z in there, but we'll find out more as we come. That has been a signing that's been in the pipeline for a while. He travelled over to Edinburgh potentially earlier last month, with a view to signing a pre-contract following the expiry of his deal at another name I'm going to butcher, Slovakian top flight side Midfield. He's been a standout in the Slovakian top flight with, I think it's just in the top flight alone, 18 goals and assists, but predominantly goals as well. We'll probably have a bigger video, more of a lowdown on it, because I have Tom Irving's doing the scouting report for Kyziridis, and hopefully that'll be up tomorrow, but we'll get Tom on and he'll talk about him. However, what I do know is that he is attacking winger. He's comfortable on both sides. I think he's predominantly right-footed, but prefers on the left. So, for example, with Islam Chesnikov, who's also a deal progressing for him, then you've got two guys who can play, they're kind of inverted wingers, but they can go down either side and they pose a goal threat. We've seen Derek McInnes, or heard from Derek McInnes over the last few days, that he has stressed the importance of, he stressed his preference to play wingers. That was an issue last season. Hearts didn't have guys who were consistently good enough to hold down a place. And in terms of wingers who get the ball, who take on their opposition player, because Kyziridis is a player who likes to drive at his fullback. So I think he was certainly, the last time I looked, he was top 3 for dribbles in the Slovakian top flight. So he's a guy who's, and if you add Chesnikov into it, two guys who get the opposition, get you off your seat, exciting, take the game to the opposition, pose a goal threat, can set up, can go either way, and want to get into the box. So that's really encouraging. And I think everyone going into this window would have pinpointed wingers with pace, with directness, with excitement as a key priority. And that's something that the club have been very proactive at this already with Kyziridis and potentially Chesnikov. Obviously, Chesnikov couldn't come in during the January transfer window. They just couldn't get an agreement done with his club in Kazakhstan, Tobol-Kastani, I believe it is. And so that's a 3-year deal. Like I said, there'll be a lowdown on him, but what I do know, aside from his ability to score goals and his proclivity to take on fullbacks, is his celebration is of Spider. It's a Spider-Man celebration. So obviously with Vargas we've had Thor, and now with Kyziridis we'll have Spider-Man. Hopefully we get to see it a lot over the coming 3 years. And again, apologies that I am just going to look at Going to look at the comments as I wait for Craig to come. I'm going to add him. Nope, he's not quite there yet. Let's see. I've been buzzing for Joel to pronounce the Greek's name. What was it again? I missed that. I'm going to go Kyziridis. Glory Boys podcast says, really pleased with this signing. He scored last night as well and a decent goal. Brings us pace and creativity. I think will work really well under McInnes. So that's the things we'll get into hopefully when Craig's all set up and we get into talking about McInnes' tactical evolution through his career. That's something that he's someone who likes wingers, but often he likes wingers that play inverted as well. So you go back to, he did it at St Johnstone. He played guys who were maybe wide midfielders who played inside, and it was the fullbacks that got up. But then you go to Aberdeen, he had Niall McGinn and Johnny Hayes, two excellent wingers and productive wingers who played on the opposite side. And then you've seen it at Kilmarnock where he had Danny Armstrong as the obviously the most obvious one. And hit the wrong button there. Danny Armstrong, and someone asking the question. Sorry, there's already a few comments, and I'll just go and scroll back and get it. But I'm not aware that Danny Armstrong's a target, so I'm not. I don't believe he'll be at Hearts next season, but already off to a good start with a couple of wingers. I'll bring in Craig now, so at least allows me to read the comments. Hello, Craig.
All right. When you added me a minute ago, that was me logging into my work computer to send the link to my.
We're live, so I'm not.
Yeah, I know to send it my other laptop to get in. I'm just explaining why I appeared as a blur a few minutes ago.
No problem at all.
Yeah,
no problem at all.
I got it eventually. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm just explaining why Kyziridis is going to be hopefully a positive signing and someone who fits into stuff we were going to talk about with regards to McInnes and the way he sets up with as he plays as an inverted winger. I am going to throw it to you. What's your initial thoughts of the signing, 3-year deal, before we move on? And it just allows me the chance to look at the comments.
Well, I think similar to Chesnikov, it's the type of player that Hearts have kind of been screaming out for, and you've probably covered it in what you've said, but at the risk of repeating something you've maybe already said, it'll fit into what McInnes wants to do as well, because if you look across pretty much all his previous teams have had wingers and inverted wingers, and sometimes those at wing back as well, wingers at wing back and inverted wingers at wing back. So yes, it does seem to be, not that I'm saying we're signing him to be a wing back or anything, but I think in terms of what he was saying about the tight pitch and having players that can work in those sort of areas, I think it sounds like the type of signing, that type of signing.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on to just quickly talk about Dhanda, before we get into the crux of the show, someone's asking, is there any strikers McInnes is going for? I'm not aware of any, but I think he likes to work with 4 or 5. So I think, again, it's hard to determine. I think the future of Shankland will be a big part in that. Because obviously if Shankland stays, you've got Shankland, you've got Wilson, likely Cabangu as well, and then we'll need to see how he views as Vargas. But I would like to think, I'm not sure how you feel about it, again, something we'll come on to talk about, but I would like to think he would like to have a more back to front physical option, like you had at Aberdeen with Cosgrove and at Kelly with, I was going to say Darius Vassell, Kyle Vassell.
Yeah, I mean, it does really depend, I suppose, because I think he's adapted a lot, both to. I think he's adaptable enough to. He doesn't seem to have had like one set way of playing over the years, so I think he likes to go in and like he talked about using Tynecastle. That's a very sort of Hearts thing, not just with it being its home stadium, but like not everybody has sort of unique setup that has, where it's embedded in right in the community and it's close to the pitch and stands are high and the atmosphere it generates and all that kind of stuff. So that's him already talking about adapting to the circumstances that he has in front of him. And every job's been different and he's tackled it differently. And even if you look at Aberdeen, I know kind of jumping ahead a wee bit here, but even if you look at Aberdeen, there's sort of been an evolution over the time at Aberdeen. So I think it'll be. Oh, I've lost my train of thought already, man. Where's he going with this?
No, just in terms of just having another option as a striker, as a
he was asked about Shankland and having what he can do around Shankland, basically. And then when you talk about Kabangu potentially being made permanent fairly soon, and then you've got Wilson, even though he may take a wee bit of a step back going in, at least at the start of next season, he may not revert to that. He may not feel the need to have a bigger option. I don't know. But I mean, I wouldn't be averse to it. But you would want something more than just sort of someone with more to their game than just like a clogging target man, I suppose.
Well, I really do hope it's the case that Hearts do bring in a big unit that starts up, not starts up front, but a big unit who is an option up front. I think it's always useful, and it's always something that I think a Scottish club could do with. Before we move on and start talking about Derek McInnes and his career, Paul Payton, no, not the ex-Dundee United midfielder, I don't think, mentions Callum Patterson, but I believe Callum Patterson's been offered a new deal with Sheffield Wednesday. Liverpool Hearts, so I hope we go for Ronan Hill. That's a good shout. I think he's had a really good season with Ross County and scored a couple of goals against us this season. And
finisher.
Yeah, really good finisher. McKenna 40. Does this mean that Spittle and Dhanda could be on the way out? So McInnes likes Spittle and Dhanda because he was keen on signing them for Kilmarnock before they came to Hearts. I would, especially Spittle, just with his versatility. I think there's definitely going to be a space for him, and also he could play in a way that we'll talk about with St Johnstone, but I'll throw that to you very, very shortly. And Bebop Boop says, I've seen Penrice, Shanks and Wilson all linked with Rangers. Is there any truth in that? I mean, Rangers, I would take anything I'd take anyone linking anything with Rangers with a pinch of salt. They don't even have a manager yet. They don't know where they're going. So I wouldn't read too much into that. Now, Craig, the main crux of the show was about the article that you wrote into McInnes's tactical evolution. So obviously McInnes was appointed on Monday. We've both been doing our research, speaking to former players he's worked with, etc. And you put together an excellent detailed breakdown of his coaching career in Scotland from St Johnstone and Aberdeen and Kilmarnock. Before look at kind of the separate spells, what was the one, having now written it and done loads and loads of research, what was the one element that stood out for you?
I don't know if there was one complete thing that stood out, but the two absolute constants that I think I saw throughout the teams were wingers, maybe a wee bit less so at St Johnstone. And then, sort of put St Johnstone aside, so from Aberdeen onwards, wingers and big defenders and pace at the back as well. Not every defender being quick, but having enough pace there so he can play the high line when he wants to. And I suppose I got a bit more of an understanding where what I would say is a lazy perception of his style of play that you hear from some people. Kind of got an appreciation both where that comes from and why it isn't true.
Yeah, and going back to the start, you spoke to Dave Mackay, the former St Johnstone captain. He was signed in a double deal from Livingston alongside Murray Davidson. So he got a real feel for McInnes, and you spoke to him, and Mackay talked about how the one disappointment was that he didn't get to experience working with McInnes and his then assistant Tony Dock even more. But it seemed, reading your St Johnstone stuff, what hammered home was like the seriousness in which he took to the management side of things, having been a player or being a player coach, and then also it started to set the tone for how he wanted his teams to play going forward, even though his ideas weren't fully fleshed out.
Yeah, I mean, he says the most of the St Johnstone stuff, besides Dave Mackay, I got from a PLZ interview from last year, and he spoke about when he got the job at St Johnstone. They were a championship club, so clearly, like, he's thinking of his tactics would be slightly different from what it'd be if they were a Premiership club. But he said he knew right away what he wanted to play high line, wanted more pace at the back, and to go back to the first part of what you were saying there, the seriousness with which he took it, kind of stopped selecting himself almost instantly. Then he was able to lean on the advice of Walter Smith, who he says he had a better relationship, developed more of a relationship with, didn't really have a relationship with him after he was a player for him. But when he became a manager, that's when he developed a relationship with him. He leaned on him for advice quite a lot. And he got advice from him about the first time you have to let some players go. That's going to be the most difficult, but you just have to do what feels right. And he said he did that. And then at Aberdeen, he sort of then puts in completely sort of changes the culture of the club off the field, from the way the players conduct themselves in the media to training and the professionalism and all that kind of stuff. And then he did the same kind of thing, which I wasn't aware about, at Kilmarnock, to a lesser extent, because I think Kilmarnock were in quite decent shape when he went in there, but he still changed a few of the structural elements, be it like things to do with the training ground and things like that. And Chris Burke even mentioned that in his interview last week about the culture that he had left after being there. So yeah, he seems to be, and Dave Mackay got that impression from him after meeting from him. He had options to go to Motherwell or back to Dundee at that point as well. But he was convinced by Derek McInnes, even at that young age in his managerial career.
In terms of on the field, so you wrote about how St Johnstone certainly Dave Mackay talked about it, was they didn't play with natural wingers all the time. So they kind of played with midfielders who could play wide but naturally drifted in, and that's where I was referencing Blair Spittle earlier on, because it was like Chris Miller, and I can't remember who the one was on the left. Oh, Liam Craig on the left hand side. But they did have kind of wingers but then he got to Aberdeen, and one thing he was fortunate with, he went into a club where they had two really, really good wingers, but he managed to guide them and find a system that took Aberdeen, using those two wingers, from the bottom six into a regular top four finisher. Yeah.
And given Celtic a run for their money for parts of the season a few times as well. At the start, it was mostly a 4-2-3-1. As you said, he walked into it was decent foundations laid there by Craig Brown, but not great. They were a defensive team that sort of relied on McGinn a lot to score goals. They had finished bottom six. 4-2-3-1. They tried to score the first goal and then counter-attack the team, their opponents from there, and he got off to a flying start. He took players like Pollitt and improved them. If it wasn't for injuries, and maybe would have gone on and had a much better career. I mean, even at Peterhead last season, Peter Pollitt was in and out a bit with injuries. It's something that I think's just plagued his entire career. And the other example that I gave in the piece was Andy Considine, who just year on year improvement into a Scotland international. Now, I know, like a fringe Scotland international, But and because of injuries and stuff, I think it was similar in the way that sort of Paul Hanlon made his way into the Scotland squad. I think it was around that time. But yeah, he was just like a steady year on year. He became like a goal scorer as well, and because he scored a hat-trick in one game. He's got some mental scoring record for Aberdeen, Andy Considine. But yeah, so that was one of the other things he did as well. Improved some of the players that he had. Brought in some average, for want of a better way of putting it, players like Adam Rooney, made them really, really good players, and also seemed to have a knack for every season. There was a lot of misses in there in terms of signings, but he had a knack for identifying a Graham Shinney or a Kenny McLean or a Lewis Ferguson every season.
Yeah, I mean, and that's because I always look back, and I think was it halfway through the season? It was the season they won that ended up winning the League Cup, and I remember Adam Rooney and Shea Logan being really important signings. Shea Logan, I think, came in, former Hearts player Shea Logan, might I add. I think he came in January on loan, and he'd end up signing a permanent deal. But one thing that was with Aberdeen is, and you talked about it, was that there was I'm trying to best how to phrase this. There was a constant. Is evolution right, or there was a constant? There was like constant tweaks, just mainly because at times you had to players like you had like Ryan Christie and James Madison on loan, or others who came in and did so well, and they got moved down. Can you kind of talk through how it kind of changed over the few years at Aberdeen?
There are a few different things. So like, it evolved to going to a back three at one point, not quite predominantly a back 3 but he went to sort of using it occasionally. Before that, there were a couple other sort of interesting tactical things that he did, like in his use of Johnny Hayes. There was a couple of games where he used Johnny Hayes as like a number 6, and then that'd be his starting position, and then he would like make runs to the wings from there. I remember watching that game live and just being perplexed by it. Let's see,
He was brilliant.
Scottish football, yeah.
I remember. I was like, I didn't bother looking. I didn't look up. But I was thinking about it earlier on. I was like, I can't remember the opposition, but I can picture him. I think it was a game at Pittodrie, and he was playing.
Can't remember if it was a cup game, but I'm pretty sure it was 2-0. They beat Dundee.
Yeah, and I remember him playing because he'd played wing back, he'd played winger, and then he was playing centre mid, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I remember, I think we might have been doing the still, like we were obviously doing the Terrace podcast back then, and I remember, I can't remember if I wrote it or said it on a podcast. Remember comparing him to Philip Lamb, just that time. That time when he just filled in.
That was like a sort of a trope on the podcast that we were doing at the time, like sort of tongue-in-cheek comparing Scottish football players to world superstars, and that was the comparison at the time. Yeah,
I'll continue to do it.
Yeah, exactly. He converted didn't he, from a fullback into a midfielder, and that's something that he's kind of done a few times. One time in a injury crisis, he moved 2 defenders into centre midfield, and then went to Motherwell and won one. Heavily lost the next game against Celtic, doing the same thing. Though more recently with Corey and Daba, that was a debate. So this is what happens with McInnes sometimes: is he does like to tweak things, and he's got a lot of fixtures. He does like to use rotation, which I think, as I've said before, it's just an inevitable part when football, when there's so many games. Less so when it's week to week. But he gets pulled up by fans for his supposed tombola team selections, or his too many square pegs and round holes when things are going wrong. But he does these things to good effect as well. And a recent example is Corey and Daba, who can't play midfield, apparently. He's quite a versatile player, but he was brought in as a left back / left wing back / central defender, I think. And he's been moved into midfield a few times. And then when it's gone wrong, it's kind of like something that's... So that's something he does like to sort of do wee tactical innovations like that. But the thing I think you were getting at was there was a time where, towards the end, there were times where it was more stodgy, maybe more defensive. There was There was more directness to somebody like Sam Cosgrove. Sam Cosgrove had a weird time at Aberdeen. He had a time where he couldn't stop scoring. I think either side of that, he looked like he could barely play. He wasn't very useful. But I think there's always a direct element to McInnes's play, and I don't mean that in a going long to a forward or to a target man. A lot of the time, it's to the wingers. He likes to go direct to. He likes to get the ball quickly to his players that can make things happen.
And that's something that I'm curious about, and I'm glad you brought it up. Is we've obviously just at the top of the show just discussed the signing of Kyziridis and the potential signing of Chesnikov, and two guys who like to get on the ball and like to go at their fullback. I have got so much time for Benny. I've got so much time for Cammy Devlin. I think they're brilliant. As McInnes will look at them and go, they are perfect for winning the ball back and kind of recycling it. My issue and my biggest criticism of them is they are trying to think willingness or lack of willingness to maybe play that longer pass. We've seen it where they can be guilty of slowing the play down in the middle of the pitch by making shorter passes. Both of them prefer making the shorter passes rather than times where you get it out, get your feet, and rather than going through someone to get it to the winger, just going to the winger directly. So it'll be interesting to see if I would imagine McInnes will look to put his own stamp in the centre of the pitch, but it'll be interesting to see how they maybe change or adapt as part of his what's the word I'm looking for, demands in terms of what he wants from his centre midfielders. In terms of Aberdeen, before we move on to Kilmarnock, is that it obviously ran its course at the end, and I think there's probably an acceptance that he probably stayed on maybe a season or two longer, and it got stale, which is, I mean, you look at it in terms of managerial terms, 3 years is deemed a long time. So 6, 7, or 8 years, whatever it is 8 years of what is just kind of unheard of, especially at this level within Scotland. So it did get a bit stale, but I think at times, and it seemed like when you talked about, he was always able to bring in like a Ferguson or like maybe Christie on loan. There was always like one or two key signings that kept it going or tweaked the team. Whereas towards the end, it felt like the hit rate was lessened. You talked about the triple signing with Hornby, Canberry, and who was the other? The
one guy that scored, Hendry.
Hendry.
Goal, I think the goal that effectively meant that, were they slipping towards the relegation playoff at the time? I honestly cannot remember. Were they that low down? But they went on a 9-game. I think they had not scored in the game before they signed those three, and then they went on a run of 9 games, only scored a 1 goal, and it was a 1-0 win against Kilmarnock, and it was Callum Hendry that scored that goal. And I think that was the goal. That was the. I'm pretty sure that was the goal that sort of meant that there was no. Kind of like when Hearts beat, who was it the other week, and it was like, right, there's no bother of relegation anymore. I'm sure it was a similar sort of scenario for them there. But yeah, I think you're right. I think I don't think there's any shame in it sort of it coming to a natural end, it maybe going a little bit stale. It's very, very uncommon for a manager to be at a club for 8 years in these times, and even more so, I pointed this out a couple of weeks ago before McInnes was appointed. I looked at it, on average, he's 4 clubs that he's been at. He's been there an average of 4 years between the 4 clubs, and you can't say that about many managers that are still kicking about these days.
Do you think that's how they came up with the 4-year deal for him? They just went and looked at his 3 clubs.
All the
like, right, he's average 4 years, so we'll give him a 4-year deal. But no, you're right. It's like you look at it and managing, was it nearly 800 games in Scottish football? That experience is massive. And there's this style of play perception. We'll come on to Killie just now, but I still go back to the first 4 or 5 years at Aberdeen. I thought they were really good to watch. As he said, and I think it's important to point out, is that this is Scottish football. You're not going to be brilliant every week. You have to have an element of pragmatism about you. And if you're able to get that balance, which he did so well at Aberdeen, then you're going to be successful. And you go back to, remember, was it 3-0 Aberdeen won at Tynecastle? Niall McGinn, remember, kind of robbed or kind of destroyed Callum Patterson at one point. And they were on, like, those first few years, a really attractive side to watch because they were able to counterattack so effectively, and they had lots of pace and kind of dynamism and directness. In terms of Kelly, move on to his final club before Hearts. What did he have to do at Kelly? Because like at St Johnstone, he took them over in the Championship, and talk us through his kind of first, essentially 18 months, because not only did he have to win the Championship, but he also had to rebuild a side that had been put together but wasn't the most effective squad for the Premiership.
It was, every year was completely, 3 seasons there, 3.5. It goes into January and then they get promoted from the Championship. But putting that aside, the 3 seasons are all completely different. The first one is just about survival. He had lots of players on contracts from the previous manager and things like that he had to kind of make do with. He used the loan market quite a bit, and it was purely about staying up, and they stayed up. They were fine in the end. And then the next season, that's where it all kind of clicked for him. Danny Armstrong had been this was kind of key to it, the wingers again. Danny Armstrong had been the key attacking threat in the first season back in the Premiership. And then the next season they added Matty Kennedy. And then there was increased attention on Armstrong, and Kennedy sort of stepped up and with the increased space thrived. And another thing that McInnes said, which he repeated to us the other day actually, was that he knew when he went in, he knew he didn't have the budget for a 20-goal season striker like he did with Aberdeen. You've maybe got more chance of you're in the ballpark for those strikers more. He will be with Hearts, especially if he can keep Shankland and get him on form. But interestingly, he decided to go with a strike pairing, what he identified as 2 10-goal season strikers, which inevitably, especially when you're playing with 2 wingers, you're giving up something else, somewhere else on the pitch. But it worked for them, and they were absolutely fantastic. We finished 4th, I think, got qualified for Europe. No player scored more than 10 goals. I think the top in the league, the top scorer was 9. So they shared goals around the team. What was quite interesting defensively, I mentioned about Corey and Daba. He would essentially most of the time play a back 4. The right back would be a central defender, and Daba, as we've said, can operate as a central defender, but he could also push on. So they would have they would have him pushing on as well. I think they tried it the last season with Calvin Ramsey doing it on the other side. And then sometimes it was just a flat 4 centre-backs across the back, which he might have done at Aberdeen a couple of times as well. I know Andy Considine's another one of those sort of halfway houses between a sort of left-back and a left centre-back, but I'm sure it's something that he did at Aberdeen a couple of times as well. Guardiola was doing it.
Yeah, and that kind of side of things, what it reminds me of is, and one of my favourite back 4s at Hearts, and it wasn't there for too long, is the way Nielsen got out of Callum Patterson, and that he played Igor Rossi at left, like when Igor Rossi was left back, and then he had Augustin and Ozturk in the middle, and then Patterson was essentially, he was like almost given like a free roll. Shifted over, and they had a really nice balance. And also, it was great. There was 4 boys who were 6 foot plus, which is always helpful.
Well, that's another thing. You can see that happening. Both the 6 foot plus thing you can see with especially his Kilmarnock defence, but a lot of his Aberdeen defences as well. And that one fullback pushing on and the other one tucking in, you can see that with Considine and Shay Logan back to his early days at Aberdeen. You can see it with Ndaba and Joe Wright or Lewis Mayo or whoever it is as well. So yeah, that's something we could very well see.
And I suppose the final thing is that you mentioned the strikers, and I just wanted to bring around to that because he did talk about the 2 strikers of Killian. I wonder, just using his Aberdeen team as an example, when he had Cosgrove and then when Rooney, so 2 guys who scored, so I think Cosgrove scored 20 plus in 2 full seasons at Aberdeen, and then Rooney was the top goal scorer for 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 years, is that when he had these guys who were able to score 20 goals a season, i.e. potentially Lawrence Shankland, he more often not played number 10 rather than a strike pairing or a second. He played a number 10 or a second striker rather than 2 guys up top. So he does have that flexibility.
I think he even found that with, last season with Watkins and Vassell. They're split strikers. They're not both playing as number 9s or anything like that. Because 2 number 9s and inverted wingers, that's a lot. You're clogging up the same space there. But I suppose talking just while we're on that with these strikers, another interesting thing from Aberdeen was Watkins when he did go to a back 3. The most you spoke to Scott Wright and he spoke about one of the most dynamic Aberdeen teams that he had was with the back 3, where Watkins was the number 9 and they had 2 inverted number 10s and Scott Wright and Ryan Hedges. And following on from that, this isn't what Scott Wright said, but following on from that, the idea there was that Watkins, who's lost a wee bit of pace in recent times, used to be a really, really fast player, would make runs in behind, stretch the defence, and that would leave more space for the 2 10s to operate in. Or otherwise, he's quite a big guy as well. He can drop in and hold up the ball for the runners to get beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was also encouraging is people going on, not the back 3, but in terms of when McInnes plays the back 3, one of the wing backs are usually, and I would say nearly always, a winger, and sometimes both wing backs are wingers, as we've seen with Darren Armstrong and Matty Kennedy at times. So it's not as if it's like, back 3, it's going to be defensive. So I would keep that in mind. I suppose I need to stop saying I suppose. It's a tick and I cannot help it. John Roberts asks, what type of formation are we expecting from McInnes? Am I right in saying just kind of what we've talked about is that they're probably the fans will need to probably get used to a wee bit of flexibility and adaptability, which is good.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, and I think there's obviously going to be a period as well where he's going to try and figure out what works. I would guess, and I can't, and obviously this is not based on any kind of inside knowledge or anything like that, but I would think that he would start with a back 4, especially when, I know you've just said there about the back 3 doesn't necessarily need to be defensive, but one reason, a sort of side reason, I don't think this is going to be the main driver for McInnes, but just the perception-wise, I wonder whether he would want to avoid starting his life as Hearts manager in a back 3, knowing what it can sort of mean to some fans and things like that. I still think that he would want to make success with a back 4. I think that's what he'll probably try to start with, and I think from what he's been saying, if Shankland signs up, I think it'll be there'll be 2 wingers, and then that's where there'll be the change. That you'll have your two central midfielders, and then it'll either be Shankland with Kabangu and Shankland dropping off, or Shankland the 9 and a 10 in behind him. I think we'll probably start the season with something like that.
I'll just bring in some other comments that I favoured before we finish up. Ali Gorman says, would McInnes have had a say in the new signing? So kind of best just clearing this up. So essentially, signings are not forced upon Derek McInnes. He'll be able to say with guys that he... essentially how it works is Jamestown will present options in terms of Derek McInnes will say, this is the profile of player I want, this is the position I want. Jamestown will present those options, and then McInnes and the club will work to for the ones that they would like in at the club. So no signings foisted upon McInnes, and it's not a case of it being McInnes doing recruitment and Jamestown doing recruitment. It's Jamestown that's doing recruitment on the basis of what Derek McInnes wants. It's as straightforward as that.
So what about this? And I don't know whether this was maybe what the question was including, but look at the case of Chesnikov, right? The Hearts have reportedly been tracking the player and trying to get the player for a wee while, predating McInnes. Now, is that something that they would then just press ahead with anyway, or is it something that then, because McInnes has come in, they then review it with McInnes and then decide?
I would believe that it would be reviewed with McInnes, and he'll sign off on players, and then there'll be ones where maybe he's like, oh, I'm not a fan of that doesn't fit my style of play or profile of player I want, so then they won't go down, keep going down the line. So there's people might, again, I can understand why people are a wee bit curious of it, but I think the important thing is to know that McInnes isn't getting players forced upon him. He's not going to be getting signings like kind of Romanov-esque where players are being turned up. It's like you have to play these.
I think that myth is out there to an extent, though. I'm not saying that's what the person that was asking that question thinks, but I think there is that perception still out there amongst some that a computer spits out an answer and then you just go with what the computer says, or the recruitment's done completely independently from the coaching department, like that. Those kind of things. I think those perceptions still exist, or that there's a deferred responsibility because of it. Now, there is to an extent, because when you're on a team rather than... because McInnes was doing it himself at Aberdeen. He was identifying the players. He was a lot of the time scouring the video footage for the players and all that kind of stuff. So, but aye.
This is interesting, is that realistically, what's McInnes' network? He's only been in Scotland and a small town in England. Jamestown brought in to broaden horizons. Players in Scotland won't take Hearts where they want to be. What I would say with that is I would hope and I expect Hearts still to have a UK/Scottish core, and that's something that we'll have an article out probably next week. Can't remember. There's still stuff held over from when we spoke to McInnes, so those quotes are embargoed, but he goes into depth about that.
Basically, I think he said this elsewhere. I don't think I'm giving anything away from the quotes that have been held over, because I think in those he repeated something that he'd already said elsewhere, in that he just wants to work with good players. And if he has a tool that takes away a lot of the work that he's had to do previously, more so at Aberdeen, less so at Kilmarnock. More so in the early stages at Aberdeen, less so in the later stages at Aberdeen and at Kilmarnock when he got in as head of recruitment. But he's happy to have a system that does a lot of the legwork and a lot of that kind of stuff, and then a sporting director that can take care of a lot of the sort of contractual stuff and all that kind of thing. And ultimately, he is banking on this giving him a better quality of player than he would have had in his previous jobs, or than the clubs that aren't using this technology in Scotland would get.
And where else we go? James Govan asked, what level would the Slovak League be compared to the Scottish? That's in terms of signing of Alexandros Kyziridis. That's something that hopefully
Tom
usually does an optographic.
Does,
I would say that the Slovakian league is below especially for the club he's playing at. They were in the relegation group. Then again, Hearts are in the relegation group in the Scottish Premiership, so don't read into that too much. Alexander Scott says McInnes will toughen up the Jambles, more attacking, physical threat, and ditch the diamond. Yeah, I don't expect to see the diamond under Derek McInnes. Jay, the Jambo, says, hopefully we play a 4-3-3, a formation we look most comfortable when playing. Will be even better with decent wingers. Adam Kabir says, do you think Wilson might go out on loan? I don't think he will. I think he is here to be part of the first team plans.
I think it'll be like I said about him taking a step back, potentially. I just wonder whether he might be like similar to what Bobby Wales was for Derek McInnes at Kilmarnock last season, something along those lines. Maybe not quite. Maybe more appearances than that, somewhere in between. I don't think we'll see. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're going to go into the season with James Wilson being the starting striker. I don't think so anyway.
No, but he'll still be part of the because McInnes will want to work with a number of strikers, so he'll be part of the first team plans.
Part of Wilson signing the new contract was to be a Hearts first team player and not to go out on loan to develop.
Mark Dowie says Ross McCausland would be a good signing for Hearts. What do you think of that, Craig? You a fan?
I can't say I've heard a lot about the player. I can't say I've seen enough of him to make a judgment. What I would say is he's not big enough to be McInnes signing.
He doesn't excite me the same way as the foreign wingers do, that's for sure. Douglas Stenhouse asks, hi guys, how big do you think McInnes will want his squad? This is something we'll probably put out next week in terms of squad analysis, but aren't we a bit squad heavy to think about more new signings? So the best way to answer this is something that Graham Jones, sport director, said on Monday, was that there's got to be a balance, and that's why I think it's going to be quite a busy window, is that Hearts can't go out and sign a raft of players currently because, and this is something I asked Graham Jones, like how big, they didn't put a number on it in terms of the squad size, but I think we can all accept that last season the squad was probably a wee bit too bloated, especially in some areas, while other areas were maybe light. So there will have to be a balance, but it'll be one where, and again, Hearts will anticipate or are anticipating being very active. Well, not very, so being active all the way up until the close of the window in August. So it's going to be a constant, I think, a constant constant balancing act, essentially. Right, there we go. I mean, we've talked enough. We were going. I suppose I did put the Dhanda suspension in the headline. So Hearts appealed Yan Dhanda's red card from Sunday. It was fast tracked at a tribunal on Tuesday. It was dismissed, meaning that Dhanda will serve a too-much suspension. We believe it'll be in the League Cup because of the way that the disciplinary guidelines work in Scotland. Craig, just quickly, because I discussed it on Sunday, what did you make of the red card and the decision?
I can see where the red card decisions come from, but then when you see why Dhanda has stumbled, it seems very harsh. And I thought that with it being reviewed again, I thought they would have maybe, because it seems, especially, I know these things don't really come into the thinking of the people that are doing it. They're just kind of trying to look at the decision objectively. But you're hamstringing a player for the next season. And Dhanda's had quite a rough time of it. And then he's just the first proper run in the team that he's had pretty much since he signed last summer. It's come towards the end of the season there under Fox. 2 sub appearances, 2 starts. He's notable in, I don't know, 3 of the 4. You could say 4 of the 4 with like the sort of defensive shift he put in up at Dingwall. He's got a wee bit of run in the team. Not the 4th one because he's been sent off, but he gets sent off and now harshly, and now he has to sit out the next 2 matches under a new manager. It just seems really harsh when I personally don't think he's done anything wrong. People maybe think I'm biased, but I think when you slow it down, it looks terrible. And then you have Derek Gallagher saying that he knows exactly what he's doing. If you slow it down, that's what it looks like. But the guy's lost his balance, and it's and he must also. This is me speculating at this point, but he must also be caught in two minds between being knocked off balance and like whether to go for the ball, and a guy like coming in front of him, and so. We've all kind of stumbled and then not known where to put our feet in that kind of thing. And I just think that it looked like he was not in control and not of his own doing. See if it's a ball coming over his shoulder and he's like, looking at it the whole way and he like accidentally kung fu kicks somebody. Still a red card, even though there's no intention at all. You're still reckless. It's still your intentional movement is one that's
endangers the opponent.
It's endangered the opponent. It's made contact with the opponent. This one, to me, it looks like Dhanda's not, through no fault of his own, he's stumbled into this guy. So it's not like so it's not like the scenario before where, like I said, where he's like eyes on the ball and he's connected with him. Because in any other scenario, you connect with a player like that, it's a real card. It's a real card all day. But not when somebody's tripped you and made you stumble into it.
Yeah, I agree. I can't add anything to that. We will finish there. Apologies, it's been a bumper episode. There was a lot to cover. As James Govan says, sounds like you guys will be busy. Yep, we will be, but we'll try and get do as many videos as possible during the week as time dictates and whatever happens. And I think we'll try and be back tomorrow with Tom to look more in depth at the new signing that was announced today, and then potentially one on Friday. Might do a solo one on Friday, and then we're back at it next week. So whenever we're back, we will. We'll be back and hopefully on time the next time, but I cannot promise that. Between the two of us, we struggled to do.
I used to sit and wait for you for 10 minutes or something like that, like almost every time. And the last few ones, it's been me. It's very much the two of us. It's very much a combined effort, but it's been me in recent times. I don't know what's happening, man. It's all going to pot.
Yeah, well, hopefully it comes out the pot for the next time. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube if you haven't done so. It's free to do so, and it does help us out a lot. Yeah, feel free to comment. We do read comments once the show has gone up on the YouTube, on YouTube, and I even the abusive ones we'll read and make note of. We will be back whenever. Please do check out heartstandard.co.uk, and there's plenty of stuff up there to read. And I would urge anyone to check out the detailed breakdown that Craig has written on Derek McInnes, and there'll be more to come over the next few days. I'm going to stop talking now. Goodbye.